All right. Well, again, welcome. Thank you so much. My name is Kara from the Quag Wildlife Refuge. I'm the program coordinator at the Quag Wildlife Refuge. And again, we're very excited to have Doug Tallamy here with us on this program called Nature's Best Hope, which is sponsored by the Leo S. Walsh Foundation, a local foundation that supports native plants and wildlife, the Quag Wildlife Refuge, and Peconic Land Trust. So we have Julia here with us today from Peconic Land Trust. And without further ado, we'll get started. I just wanted to give everyone a little bit of background about the Quag Wildlife Refuge if you have never visited us before. We're located on the South Fork of Long Island in between West Hampton and Southampton. We're a 305-acre nonprofit nature preserve. Trails are open every day from sunrise to sunset, and there are 7 miles of hiking trails that you can come and enjoy. So we are within the Pine Barrens, which is great habitats to learn about here on Long Island. And you can visit our website for more information, which is quagwildliferefuge.org. But again, we're open every day of the year. You can come and hike our trails in the summer, fall. In the winter, we rent cross-country skis for non-members and members of the refuge. So you can become a member also on our website. Our mission is to serve as responsible land stewards of the refuge property and its natural resources and promote, implement, and support environmental education. A big part of our mission is to take care of permanently injured wildlife that we have or have had in the past, like some of the animals on our screen, and you can come and visit those animals as well. A new initiative that we have at the refuge is called Go Native for Wildlife, and we're partnering with local nurseries that are committing to sell native plants. So you can visit our website to learn more about some local nurseries that are selling native plants, which are great for wildlife, and we'll learn more about with Doug today. So I'm pass it over to Julia to say a few words about the Peconic Land Trust.
Thank you. Good evening. I'm Julia King, Marketing and Communications Assistant with the Peconic Land Trust. We're very excited to partner with the Quag Wildlife Refuge tonight and share the critically important messages that you will hear from Doug Tallamy. We are big fans of Mr. Tallamy and support his call for immediate changes in landscape practices that will lead to improvements in biodiversity. In fact, one of his books, Bringing Nature Home, was the first book we read in our Peconic Land Trust book club this year. It offered wonderful information in line with what he will discuss tonight. As you may know, the Peconic Land Trust was founded in 1983 with a mission to conserve Long Island's working farms, natural lands, and heritage. And with your help, as well as the support of thousands of individuals, partner organizations, foundations, community groups, and all levels of government, we've been able to protect over 13,000 acres of land throughout Long Island. This includes thousands of acres of working farmland, as well as natural lands like shorelines, meadows, and woodlands that provide places to explore nature, offer habitat for wildlife, and protect our water for drinking, fishing, aquaculture, and recreation. We are able to do all of this because of supporters like you. Thank you for spending some time with us this evening to learn what you can do to support wildlife biodiversity in our area. And with that, I turn it back.
All right, so I'll introduce our speaker tonight. Doug Talamy is a professor in the Department of Entomology and Wildlife Ecology at the University of Delaware, where he's authored 104 research articles and has taught insect taxonomy, behavioral ecology, humans and nature, and other courses for 40 years. Chief among his research goals is to better understand the many ways insects interact with plants and how such interactions determine the diversity of animal communities. His book, Bringing Nature Home, How Native Plants Sustain Wildlife in Our Gardens, was published by Timber Press in 2007 and was awarded the 2008 Silver Medal by the Garden Writers Association. In 2020, his book, Nature's Best Hope, urges homeowners to take environmental action into their own hands 1 yard at a time. And in March 2020, his book, The Nature of Oaks, just came out. So a new book that we can all look forward to reading. So thank you so much for being with us, Doug, tonight, and I will pass it over to you.
All right, thanks, Kara. Pleasure to be here tonight. We have a very wonderful weather here finally. It's been raining for a long time, but got a nice day today. So thanks for being inside and listening to my idea of what Nature's Best Hope is. Before I tell you that, though, I want to revisit what happened in 2019. In the fall of 2019, we had what we call an oak mast in the red oak group. All the members of the red oak group got together and decided to make their acorns at the same time. And this is what it looked like. Well, I'm easily entertained. So I took one of those acorns and I just stared at it, but I was rewarded because an insect started to chew its way out of the acorn. First, it chewed a hole for its head, stuffed its head through there, and then it stuffed its entire body through that hole. It was a very tight fit. Made him look like the Pillsbury Doughboy. Finally, he plopped down, and that's a dangerous time for that insect larva because it is good to eat. There are a lot of things that are after it. So it gets to safety by wiggling and squirming beneath the soil surface, takes about 30 seconds, down it goes. And once it's underground, it stretches in all directions and forms a chamber. And within that chamber, converts itself to a pupa. And it stays there for 2 years. After 2 years, comes out as an acorn weevil. This is what an acorn weevil looks like. A lot of people think weevils have big noses because it looks like they do, but that's actually an extension of the head capsule, and the mouth parts are way down at the end of that extension. They take those mouth parts and chew a hole into the center of the acorn, turn around and lay an egg in it, and that is how the larva gets down there. Well, you might wonder why they spend 2 years underground. Why don't they come out the next year like most insects? And the reason is that it takes red oak acorns 18 months to complete their development. So if the weevils came out every year, they wouldn't have enough acorns. Once they leave the acorn, that does leave a hole there, a true vacuum. And you know that nature abhors a vacuum. And in this case, she has filled it with 3 species of temnothorax ants, tiny little ants where the entire colony lives in the vacated holes made by acorn weevils. And if scouts find a new acorn with an empty hole, they get very excited because their old acorn is falling apart. So they tell everybody it is time to move. So they grab the larvae, they grab the eggs, they move the entire colony into the new acorn in about 30 minutes. Then they post a guard right here, make sure nobody else comes in. And this is where they'll live for the next 2 years until this acorn disintegrates. What's my point? My point is that that is just one of literally millions of very specialized interactions that comprise the bulk of nature. This is another one, the relationship between jays and oaks. Jays are the primary disperser of oak acorns. They'll take an acorn, they'll fly up to a mile from the parent tree, they tap it beneath the surface of the soil. And the idea is they'll go and eat that during the wintertime, but they only remember where they put 1 out of every 4 acorns, which means they're planting. For every 4 acorns they bury, they're planting 3 oak trees. And they can bury thousands in a fall. So very specialized interaction. Here's another one, the relationship between witch hazel, which blooms late in the fall, and winter moths. Winter moths are the primary pollinators of witch hazel. Always wondered about that, but it happens at night, so you don't see it. This is one of the species of winter moths, the bicolored sallow. I actually caught this guy on Christmas Eve, so they're out late as well. Specialized relationship between pileated woodpeckers and carpenter ants. That is what they rear their young on. So you won't have pileated woodpeckers unless you have lots of carpenter ants, and you won't have carpenter ants unless you have the big trees that make those carpenter ants. You won't have this bee, Andrena facilii, unless you have that plant, Facilia. That is the only pollen that that bee can rear its young on. And it turns out that pollen specialization is very common in our native bees. For example, there are at least 13 species of bees on Long Island that can only reproduce in the pollen of perennial sunflowers. You won't have the Baltimore checker spot unless you have white turtlehead. I could go on all night talking about nature's specialized relationships. But today, these relationships, nature itself is on the ropes. And it's on the ropes because we did not take Teddy Roosevelt's advice. Way back in 1908, Teddy heard that the state of Arizona was going to mine the Grand Canyon. So he went to the canyon, looked out over the edge, and he said, leave it as it is. And with those 5 words, he started the process of creating the Grand Canyon National Park. Well, of course, we can't leave the country as it was because we haven't. There's only about 5% of the lower 48 states that's anything close to its original pristine ecological condition. And that's because we have logged the country repeatedly. We have tilled it. We have drained it. We have grazed it. We've got 770 million acres of rangeland in the US, which is 4.5 times the size of Texas. And of course, we paved it or otherwise developed it. We have straightened our rivers and dammed them, and you can spell that any way you want. We have polluted our skies and changed our climate for centuries to come. We have drained our aquifers. We've introduced more than 3,300 species of plants from other continents, many of which are running amok in our natural areas. In short, we've carved up those natural areas into tiny remnants of their former self. And each one of those remnants is too small and too isolated from other remnants to support the species that run the ecosystems that we all depend on. Why have we done that? I don't know. I suspect we thought the earth was so big that we could foul it forever. Our nest was so big we could foul it forever and there wouldn't be any consequences. But of course, we were wrong about that. And that's why we're seeing pretty scary headlines like this in a regular clip. Like the insect apocalypse is here. What does it mean for the rest of life on Earth? Talking about global insect decline. Followed by this one, North America's lost 3 billion breeding birds in the last 50 years. That's almost a third of the North American bird population gone. And the UN says, well, we're going to lose 1 million species to extinction, probably in the next 20 years. And I love the way they report it, as if it's an option. I mean, they report this and go on to the next headline. They might as well say we're going to lose oxygen in the next 20 years and then just go on to the next headline. This is not an option, folks. We cannot lose 1 million species. We cannot lose the natural systems that are our life support systems. Not if we want to stay on this planet. So we have to make sure that doesn't happen. I could go on talking about the pox that we humans have delivered upon the environment, and thus upon all of our houses. But that's not what this talk is about. This talk is about a cure for that pox. It's a cure that'll take small efforts from lots of people, but those small efforts will deliver enormous physical, psychological, and environmental benefits to everybody. Let's return to this headline. An insect apocalypse is here. What does it mean for the rest of life on Earth? Well, the great E.O. Wilson, the most famous entomologist of all times, told us what it would mean if we were to lose insects on planet Earth. And he did it way back in 1987 with this paper, The Little Things That Run the World. His message was very clear. Life as we know it depends on insects. And if they were to disappear, so would most of our flowering plants. And if most of our flowering plants disappeared, that would so drastically change energy flow through our terrestrial ecosystems that the food webs that support our animals, the amphibians, the reptiles, the birds, the mammals, even many of our freshwater fishes, those food webs would collapse and those animals would disappear. The biosphere, the living portion of the earth, would rot because we would have lost insect decomposers that right now rapidly turn over nutrients, but without them, you'd only have bacteria and fungi to do the job, and that would take a long time. Humans, of course, would not survive any of those drastic changes. There is good news here, though, and that is that it doesn't have to happen. We can save our insects, we can save our birds, we can save nature itself, but we're going to have to change the way we landscape in order to do it. Why is that? Well, remember, humans are products of nature. We are totally dependent on those life support systems that nature produces. We call them ecosystem services. We always talk about them as if nature's producing them for us. Well, it is, but it's also producing them for everything else as well. Like oxygen, that's what plants do. They produce oxygen, pretty important. Clean water, also pretty important. Carbon capture, enormously important in today's world. Plants are capturing carbon. They're pulling carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, out of harm's way, using the carbon to build their tissues and then pumping the extra carbon through their roots into the ground. Our soils are brown or black because of the carbon that plant roots have deposited there over the eons. Plants build topsoil and hold it in place. They prevent floods. They dampen severe weather. They convert sunlight into food. If we lost our plants, we would have to eat sunlight without them. And I wish us luck on that. What do animals do for plants? Well, they provide pest control services. They pollinate nearly 90% of our flowering plants. They disperse plant seeds. So designing landscapes like this that destroys the production of ecosystem services, it's just not a good idea. Never was a good idea, but today it's a downright terrible idea because we need more ecosystem services today than ever before. We have more people on the planet today than ever before. 7.8, 7.9 billion people. So taking huge parts of the earth out of production, particularly for status symbols, is just not a good idea. There have been visionaries through the ages who have recognized that we humans needed to work on our relationship with planet Earth, and Aldo Leopold was one of the most eloquent. He wrote extensively in the first half of the 1900s. One of the things he said is that the oldest task in human history is to live in a piece of land without spoiling it. Now, there have been indigenous groups that have been good at doing that, but our huge Western societies and our huge Asian societies are terrible at doing that. We habitually take more from the earth than it has to offer, completely wrecking an area, then going to another area and doing the same thing. Clearly not sustainable behavior. So Alma had an idea, a dream really, that we humans were capable of developing what he called a land ethic. He knew we had to use the earth. We had to farm and lumber and graze and mine and do all of those things. But he really believed that we could learn to do them gently enough that we could do them without destroying local ecosystems. And that's what he called a land ethic. Wrote about it in the same county almanac. What he did not write about was developing a land ethic where we actually lived. And I'm not sure why that was, but I suspect that the notion that humans and nature cannot coexist in the same place at the same time was so deeply embedded in the culture of Aldo Leopold's day, still embedded in our own culture, that he may not have recognized it as an option. What I want to argue this evening is that not only is living with nature an option, it is now the only viable option that's left to us. Of course, in the past, conservationists worked pretty much exclusively where there weren't a lot of people. We now need to turn that on its head. We need to save nature, actually reconstruct it where we've already destroyed it, where there are a lot of people, because that's pretty much everywhere. In other words, we have to find ways for nature to thrive in human-dominated landscapes, not someplace else anymore, but right where we live, work, and play. And I don't mean hang on by a thread, I mean thrive. Where are we going to start? Well, let's go back to private property. We can't ignore conservation on private property any longer because most of the land is privately owned. 85.6% of the US east of the Mississippi is privately owned. 78% of the entire country is privately owned. If we don't do conservation on private property, we're going to fail because we won't be working in areas that are big enough or connected enough to sustain the species that run the ecosystems that support us. There are conservation opportunities that we are not taking advantage of right now that we could be. How about power and pipeline rights of ways? 21 million acres. You know, I looked up the other day how big a million acres is. It's 1.5 times the size of Rhode Island. So what do we have? 23, 24 Rhode Islands in power and pipeline rights of ways. That's a lot of land. Railroad rights of ways, 3 million acres. Golf courses, 2 million acres. Airports, 3 million acres. You know, the Denver airport is twice the size of Manhattan. It's a big place. Roadsides, another 17 million acres. Then we have all the places where we live, both in rural areas, suburbia, our cities, hundreds of millions of acres in those landscapes. If you add up just those spaces, and you can think of others, that's 599 million acres where we could be doing conservation that right now we're really not. How big is 599 million acres? Well, it's big. It's bigger than Vermont, plus New Jersey, plus Maine, Virginia, New York, Georgia, Florida, Oklahoma, plus Montana, California, even throw Texas in there. Not having a place to do conservation is not the issue. We can do conservation almost anywhere. Now, when I talk about conservation, I'm not using the word accurately. I'm not talking about conserving unspoiled spaces. We do want to do that, but you know, there aren't that many unspoiled spaces left. So what we need to do is rebuild the nature we have already spoiled. But in order to do that, we have to focus on the most important species. Not all species contribute to ecosystem function equally. So we have to start with the building blocks, and other species can add in later. And there are two groups that we are essential. We can't do without them. One is the flowering plants. They're capturing energy from the sun and through photosynthesis, turning it into the food that supports most of the life on Earth. Well, you're not going to have flowering plants unless you have the pollinators that allow them to reproduce. So that's one group that is essential. Well, now you've got the energy from the sun in the form of food in plant parts, mostly leaves, but we've got to get that energy to animals or the animals disappear. Most vertebrates don't eat plants directly. They eat something that ate plants. So something typically is invertebrates, is insects. And it turns out that caterpillars are the most important group in terms of transferring energy from plants to other animals, more than any other type of plant eater. So when we're restoring nature, when we're building new ecosystems, they have to contain a lot of caterpillars or we will have failed food webs. Let me use the Carolina chickadee as an example. Now you've got black-capped chickadee up on Long Island, but it's practically the same bird doing the same thing. In the wintertime, they are the common birds at our bird feeder eating bird seed. So we tend to think that's what chickadees need. 50% of their diet in the winter is bird seed. So that's half of what they need in the wintertime. But when they're reproducing, their babies can't eat seeds, so they switch entirely to insects. And if they're in a healthy environment, they will feed their young almost entirely on caterpillars. And it turns out that they are not exceptions. 96% of our terrestrial birds rear their young on insects, and most of those insects turn out to be caterpillars. How do I know that? Well, there's a number of studies that suggest that, but this is a citizen science project that one of my recent students completed, Ashley Kennedy. She put out a call to bird photographers around the country to take pictures of birds during the breeding season when they were carrying food items to the nest. And to send those pictures to Ashley, she was going to identify the prey that were in the beaks of the birds and reconstruct the nestling diets of as many birds as she could in North America. And you're looking at some of her results. This is the 20 most common bird families that she had enough data for. The green bars are the percentage of the nestling diet for each one of these bird families. That was caterpillars. And in 16 out of the 20 common bird families, caterpillars dominated the diet. So again, imagine what would happen if we designed landscapes that did not have enough caterpillars. Most of our birds would not be able to reproduce. So what's special about caterpillars? Several things are special about caterpillars, and one of them is that they are soft. Think of this guy as if he's a little sausage with a very thin wrapper. The thin wrapper is exoskeleton, it's cuticle, it's made of chitin, which is undigestible, so the birds don't want a lot of that. And because caterpillars are soft, you can stuff them down the throat of your offspring without fear of injuring it. If you ever watched a parent bird rear their young, they're pretty rough. Their beak is like a plunger, they just stuff it down there. Caterpillars are also relatively large prey items. One medium-sized caterpillar is equal to the biomass of 200 aphids. Now, actually many of our smaller birds chase aphids around, but do you want to chase 200 aphids or get one caterpillar? They're nutritious, they're very high in fat, very high in protein. They have a low percentage of chitin compared to most other insects, particularly beetles. Beetles are not like little sausages, they're like little tanks. So much of a beetle is undigestible, and a lot of beetles have sharp edges. And finally, it turns out that caterpillars are the best source of carotenoids for birds during the breeding season. Now, I mentioned carotenoids not because I love organic chemistry, but because I'm a vertebrate, and you're a vertebrate, and birds are vertebrates, and we vertebrates cannot make our own carotenoids. Only plants make carotenoids. So we have to get our carotenoids from plants, and we have to get them from plants because carotenoids are essential components of vertebrate diets. And that's why my wife Cindy makes sure I have lots of carrots to get my beta carotene, and lots of tomatoes to get my lycopene, and lots of whatever that is to get my lutein. Had some of that tonight. And when I eat those things, it stimulates my immune system. And I can't think of a better time to have a healthy immune system. Carotenoids are antioxidants. They run around our body, protect our DNA from oxidative damage. They improve color vision. When your mother said, eat your carrots, you will see better, she was right. She didn't know she was right, but it turns out she was right. They improve sperm vitality. They improve sexual attractiveness. Now we're talking about things like this prothonotary warbler male who is bright yellow because he's had access to lots of luteins. He takes those luteins, he makes pigments out of them, puts them in his feathers. And the brighter yellow he is, the more ladies he attracts. Where's he getting his carotenoids from? From what he eats, of course, but carotenoid levels are not equal across bird prey items. These first two bars here are types of caterpillars. They have far more carotenoids than other bird prey. Here are the adult caterpillars down here. The moths and butterflies themselves, far fewer carotenoids because they're not eating green leaves. That's where the carotenoids are. And here's the earthworm. So the early bird gets the worm, but he doesn't get any carotenoids when he gets the worm. So that study and several others are suggesting that it really appears that caterpillars are not optional parts of bird diets. They're essential parts of bird diets. So let's just say caterpillars need birds. The next question is, no, let's say that birds need caterpillars. That's better. How many caterpillars do birds need? That's a good question. Well, let's go back to chickadees. How many caterpillars does it take to make a nest of chickadees? Is 1 or 2 a day enough, or 3 or 4? Who knows? Well, no, it takes lots, thousands of caterpillars to make one clutch of chickadees to get them to the point where they leave the nest. 6,000 to 9,000 caterpillars, depending on the number of chicks in the nest. And after they leave the nest, after they fledge, the parents continue to feed them caterpillars another 21 days until the birds are independent And then they can keep eating caterpillars. So you're talking about tens of thousands of caterpillars required to produce one successful clutch of chickadees. And chickadees are tiny birds, third of an ounce. That's 4 pennies worth of bird. And if you want chickadees to breed in your yard, and I would think you do because in so many places that's all that's left, you have to have all those caterpillars in your yard. They only forage about 50 meters from the nest. They're not flying 5 miles down the road to the nearest woodlot. And if we design landscapes that does not have all of those caterpillars, that's called insect decline. And it's really looking like that's a major cause of the bird declines that we're seeing. We went to the original data set of Rosenberg et al. That's the group that said we've lost 3 billion birds in the last 50 years. We divided the terrestrial bird species into the groups, the species that require insects at some part of their life history, typically when they're reproducing, and the species that don't require insects. They can reproduce on seeds, so things like finches and doves. They didn't lose any numbers in the last 50 years. But the species that require insects lost on average 10 million individuals per species. That's where the losses are occurring, the species that depend on insects. It doesn't prove cause and effect, but it certainly is suggestive that as you take away bird food, the birds disappear. I mean, it's really not rocket science. Well, we don't want our birds to disappear. We don't want all the things that eat insects that I haven't talked about to disappear. So we need to change the goals of how we landscape. In the past, we've landscaped strictly for aesthetics. We thought plants were just decorations. And if anything came to eat them, we made sure we killed them. And then of course we have dead landscapes. But we can turn that around. We can actually put insects like caterpillars into our landscapes by adding the plants that support them, the plants that make those insects. So how do we do that? How do we add caterpillars? By being very fussy about which plants to add. Most plants don't support a lot of caterpillars. So we have to be fussy about it. And we have to be fussy about it because the caterpillars themselves are very fussy. And the monarch butterfly illustrates that perfectly. You can have all of the Callery pear, the Bradford pears, all the burning bush, all the barberry, all the boxwood, all of the hostas, all of the Asian ornamentals that we have used in our yards for the last 100 years. And you won't make a single monarch butterfly. The only thing that's going to make a monarch butterfly is a milkweed. That's called host plant specialization. It turns out that most of the insects that eat plants are host plant specialists. They can only eat particular plants. Why is that? Well, because plants have made them specialize. Plants don't want to be eaten. They want to capture the energy from the sun and use it for their own growth and reproduction. So they've loaded their tissues with nasty tasting chemicals, secondary metabolic compounds that make those tissues either bitter or downright toxic. And it's a really effective defense. It keeps most of the insects of the world from eating most of the plants of the world. And that's why it's green out there right now. It's not because there are no insects out there that want to eat those plants. It's that most of the insects that are out there cannot eat most of the plants. They are too well protected. But we do know that insects eat plants. So how do they do that? How do they get around those chemical defenses? Well, this is where the specialization comes in. 90% of the insects that eat plants are host plant specialists. Every plant lineage that's out there protects itself with a unique cocktail of chemical defenses. And an insect species can't adapt to all of them. So it picks one or two that are really similar in how they protect themselves. And it develops the enzymes that store and excrete and detoxify those compounds, the behavioral adaptations, the life history adaptations that minimize the exposure of the insect to those compounds. And those adaptations allow them to circumvent the compounds of those particular plant lineages. But it takes a long period of evolutionary history with those particular plants for all those adaptations to fall into place. It does not happen overnight. And once it does happen, the insect is locked into eating just those plants. Which means when we bring plants over from other continents, of course, our insects have not been able to specialize on those plants. They've never seen those defenses before. So they can't eat those plants. And that's why when we're trying to rebuild food webs, plant choice matters. We have to choose the plants that are going to support the insects, particularly the moths, the caterpillars that drive the energy in those food webs. And if we don't pick the right plants, we're not going to succeed. And I'm going to give you 3 examples of how well this does work when you do pick the right plants. And I'm going to start with our house right here in Oxford, Pennsylvania. We have 10 acres on a farm that was broken up not too long ago. It was a very old farm, had been farmed for nearly 300 years. The last thing they did, you know, the soil was exhausted, but the last thing they did was mow it for hay. And when you mow for hay around here, what you're really mowing are all the rootstocks of all the invasive plants that have escaped our gardens, the multiflora rose and the oriental bittersweet and the Japanese honeysuckle and the bush honeysuckle and the autumn olive and the miscanthus and on and on and on. You mow that and you call that hay. And you know, they use it for the mushroom industry, so it really doesn't matter what you're mowing. Of course, when we started to build the house, they stopped mowing. And what do you think came back from all those rootstocks? We had 10 acres of serious invasion of plants from Asia. It looked like Sleeping Beauty's castle. That's my wife, Cindy. She's getting ready to clear those 10 acres. And she has done it. As a matter of fact, she's outside right now, making sure she got every last one. Of course, the neighbors did not do that, so we're always invaded with new plants. But I'm showing you this just to convince you, if you have a lot of invasive plants, don't give up. It is possible to get rid of them. It is a lot of work, but if Cindy can do it, you can do it too. What was I doing while she was working hard? I was telling her she was doing a great job, but it was my job to put the plants back. The goal here, of course, was to rebuild the biodiversity that once was on this little piece of land in Pennsylvania. And the only way I can rebuild the biodiversity is to rebuild the food web by putting the plants to support the caterpillars that are the basis of that food web back on our property. And I started by trying to attract the Canadian owlet. I'd never even seen a Canadian owlet before, but that's what one looks like. It's a pretty little caterpillar. That's what the adult looks like, just like a leaf. Well, you're not going to have Canadian owlets unless you have meadowroot. That's the only plant they eat. Just like monarchs only eat milkweed, Canadian owlets only eat meadowroot. We didn't have any meadowroot. I mean, the place was farmed to death for 300 years, meadowroot long gone. But I got some seeds from someplace, planted them. And you know what? This was early on. I had very little confidence that Canadian owlets would find my little patch of meadowroot. So I didn't even go out and check the plants. They grew really nicely. But about 2 months after I planted them, I did wander by for another reason, and they were covered with Canadian owlets. The owlets had found it right away. I'm still surprised about that, but that was a big success. So now we have a good population of meadowroot and Canadian owlets. So we've added 2 species to the biodiversity on our property. Same story with the goldenrod stowaway. That's a misnomer for this beautiful moth. It has nothing to do with goldenrod. It's a specialist on this plant, Biden's aristosa, ditch daisy. We could call it Joe Biden's aristosa, I guess. I did know where there were some Bidens. It was in a power line cut about 14 miles away. So I went, got some seeds, planted them in our house. They grew very nicely. Well, it took a year for the goldenrod stowaway to find our Bidens, but they did. And now we have a good population of both of those. So now we've added 4 species to the property. Same story with the Hackberry Emperor. Wanted Hackberry Emperor at our house. Not because it's the most beautiful butterfly in the world, but because it belongs here. It's part of the fauna that should be here. Well, as its name suggests, it's a specialist on hackberry. And again, we didn't have any hackberry, so I planted hackberry. Well, it took 4 years for the butterflies to find our hackberry, but they finally did. A year ago, I walked by one of my hackberry trees in June, and there were 9 Hackberry Emperor caterpillars on a single branch. So another big success. Now we've added 6 species to the property. And that's how it went. I did not plant goldenrod. It came in on its own, but along with it came many of the things that depend on goldenrod, like the beautiful brown-hooded owlet, the Arcedra flower moth, the goldenrod leaf miner, the distinct Sparaginothus, the goldenrod gall moth. Now, this is one that hasn't come, the goldenrod flower moth. I don't know why it hasn't found our goldenrod. There's got to be a reason. I haven't figured it out yet. That's what the caterpillars look like. But this is part of the fun. This is anticipation. It's like waiting for the ketchup to come out of the bottle. Every year I go out and I look for the goldenrod flower moth. One of these years I'm going to find it, and that'll be a great day. I planted Virginia creeper. Yes, Virginia creeper. It's a great native plant, but I hear that people don't like it. I just don't know why they don't like it. It makes really nutritious berries for the birds in the fall, very high in fat, exactly what they need. It can climb our trees and without girdling them, without pulling them down, has great fall color. It's a great pollinator plant, believe it or not. The flowers that make those berries are small and inconspicuous, little yellow green things. You don't even notice them, but the pollinators love them. When you're planting a pollinator garden, think like a bee, not like a human. It's not how pretty the flower is, it's how much nectar and pollen it produces. That's important. But the reason I planted it is because it's the major host plant for the large sphinx moths, the big caterpillars that are the primary component of cardinal diets. Things like the Pandora sphinx and its beautiful adult, the lettered sphinx, the hog sphinx, the abbot sphinx, all on Virginia creeper. Wanted to see if I could get the double-toothed prominent at our house, just because it's such a cool looking caterpillar. I mean, even if you don't like caterpillars, you got to love this guy. It's a specialist on elm, particularly American elm. And of course, we didn't have any American elm. We lost most of our elms to Dutch elm disease, but not at the University of Delaware. There's still some large elms there that did not die. So I scooped up some seeds in the spring and planted them. They were all in the gutters there. Planted them at home. They grew really nicely. So that was 19 years ago. Those trees are 80 feet tall right now. And the caterpillar came right away. Another big success. Wanted the evening primrose moth because it's beautiful. I like beauty like anybody else. We didn't have any evening primrose, believe it or not. So I planted some. The moth came, spends the day with its head stuffed in the flowers. It's very cute. And I planted lots of oaks. Now, those are just examples of the plant lineages I put back on the property, but I want to spend some time on oaks because they're such important plants. This is the Bedford oak in Bedford, New York. Maybe some of you have visited it. It's enormous. People argue about whether it's 400 years old or 500 years old. And, you know, I hear people say, well, I'm not going to plant an oak because I won't live long enough to enjoy it. And if your oak has to be 400 years old before you can enjoy it, you're right, you won't. But if you can enjoy what your oak is delivering for the ecosystem in your yard, you can enjoy it right away. And I can say that with confidence because I planted most of my oaks as acorns, which means they were free, or as 2-foot bare root whips, which means they cost $1.50 each. And immediately they started to support the food web that supports most of the biodiversity on our property by bringing in those moths, things like the solitary oak leaf miner, Juvenil's dusky wing, the yellow-shouldered moth, the orange-headed epicalema, the red-washed caterpillar, the yellow-vested moth, the orange-tufted oneida, the spiny oak caterpillar, the two-spotted oak punky, the variable oak leaf caterpillar, the red-humped oak worm, the orange-humped oak worm, the pink-striped oak worm, the hesitant dagger moth. I usually hesitate over the hesitant dagger moth. The smaller oak dagger moth, the greater oak dagger moth. It was a lesser oak dagger moth, the streak dagger moth, the afflicted dagger moth, the crown bucolatrix, the orange-patched smoky smoky moth, yes. The white blotched heterocampa, the oblique heterocampa, the red line panapoda, the laugher, and hundreds more species have come to the oaks on our property. And they come right away. This is a pin oak that just popped its head above the leaves, and here's a caterpillar standing on the ground eating the leaves of that oak. So you don't have to wait hundreds of years for your oaks to start to contribute to the food web in your yard. This is what our yard looks like today. That's my Zoom room right there. I'm sitting in that room, and I show you this to show you that we are very traditional. We've got some lawn here, but we put a lot of plants back. I'm still adding plants to the property. And every time I add a new plant lineage, there's a good chance that I will attract new species of moths that specialize on that particular plant. And 4 years ago, I made it a goal to try to take a picture of every species of moth that I could find on our property. I'm still at it, but I am up to 1,090 species of moths. That's considerably more than all the species of birds in all of North America. You know, we have 10 acres. Pennsylvania is 2.4 million acres. So on 1/240,000th of the landmass, we have 40% of all the moths that occur in Pennsylvania. And because so many of those moth species are types of bird food, we have recorded 60 species of birds that have bred on our 10 acres, not flew by, but bred. Why am I telling you this? Well, this is another headline we saw this fall. World Wildlife Fund says 2/3 of our wildlife have vanished since 1970. I love the word vanished. It's a mystery. We've killed 2/3 of the wildlife on planet Earth since 1970, but I'm thinking not at our house. I'm sure we have increased biodiversity by at least 2/3 at our house. And it didn't take nearly that long. We did it simply by putting the right plants back on our property, something everybody can do. So don't despair when you see these terrible headlines. Just get mad. Just like, really, I'm going to change this. You can change it right where you live. But I know what you're thinking. We've got 10 acres and a lot of people have smaller properties. Will it work on smaller properties? And that's a good question. So let's go to Margie and Dan Terpstra's house in Kirkwood, Missouri. They have 0.6 acres, 18 times less land than Cindy and I have. And they live in a typical suburban neighborhood. When they moved in, their yard was choked with their common invasive plant there, Amur honeysuckle, bush honeysuckle. So they got rid of that. And then they put in a lot of species of native plants. I got to find out how many species they put in. And they added a water feature they call a bubbler. And then they sat back and started to count the birds that use their yard. And they are up to 149 bird species that have used their yard, including 35 warbler species. Just to put that in perspective, on our 10 acres, we've only recorded 8 warbler species. So does it work on smaller properties? Absolutely. What about urban yards? Let's go to Pam Carlson's yard in Chicago. And I mean in Chicago, because on the other side of that wall there is one of the runways of O'Hare Airport. Right over here is Kennedy Expressway. Pam has 1/10 of an acre. It's a pretty 1/10 of an acre, but it's 3 times smaller than the average lot size in North America. And there's no connectivity with her yard and any other natural area or any natural area at all. So she's an island. But she did the same thing. She got rid of her native plants, put in a water feature for the birds, and then she sat back and started to count the birds that have used her property. And she's up to 120 bird species that have used her yard, including a woodcock. There's Pam's woodcock. So if you haven't seen a woodcock lately, go to Pam's house. What about city centers, though? 82% of us in North America live in cities. Are all those people going to miss out on this fun? Well, in 2014, I was staring at this plant, Asclepias tuberosa. People call it butterfly weed, which reminds me we have a marketing issue with our native plants. We call them weeds and wonder why people don't plant them. So let's not call this butterfly weed. Let's call it Monarch's Delight. All right, 2014, I'm staring at Monarch's Delight. The first thing I saw were 2 species of leafcutter bees, megachilid leafcutter bees, a big one and a smaller one. I know they were megachilid because they carry their pollen on their tummy, not on their legs. Well, leafcutter bees have very strict requirements, so they won't be in a particular area. Not only do they need pollen and nectar, but they also need soft leaves. Leaves of red bud are perfect because they cut the edges of those leaves out, leave these little semicircles, roll up the semicircles, stuff it full of pollen, lay an egg on it, and then put the whole package into a crack or a crevice, and that's how they reproduce. Well, there was a red bud growing right next to Monarch's Delight, so the bees had everything they needed. I'm pretty sure that's why there were bumblebees there as well. You know, bumblebees over winter as queens. So when they come out in the spring, there are no workers to help them. The queen has to do all the work. And she has to start the colony by doing all the foraging for the pollen and the nectar herself. So she needs very efficient foraging. She needs a lot of nectar and pollen close by. And that's exactly what redbud provides early on in the season, exactly when she needs it. And then I saw a monarch. Actually, I saw 2 monarchs. Now, this was 2014. In 2013, I had gone the entire year without seeing a single monarch. That was the low point in the monarch population in the East. Only 3.6% of the monarchs left compared to 1976. And this was June. So it was early on in the year, early to see monarchs this far north. So I was encouraged. Maybe the monarchs weren't going to disappear after all. Why were they there? Well, they had Monarch's Delight, but there was another species of milkweed there as well. Purple milkweed, I think it was, which means the monarchs had nectar, but they also had their host plant, everything they needed to continue their population. Do you know where I was? I was on the High Line in the middle of Manhattan. Many of you have probably been to the High Line. Of course, it was a elevated railroad that had been abandoned for decades. Finally, somebody went up there and noticed there were a lot of native plants growing without any help from anybody. So they decided to make it a tourist destination. They renovated it. They had this natural strip, not entirely of natives, but mostly of natives. And now it is a major destination for people in Lower Manhattan. More than 1 million people a year go to the High Line. There's always people up there, but that didn't discourage the monarchs or the bumblebees or the leafcutter bees. Somebody's done a survey of the native bees that are using the highline. It's over 30 species at this point. This is Rick Dark. He was always after me to go see the beautiful plantings of the highline. I'm not much of a city boy, so I dragged my feet for quite a while. And, you know, seeing beautiful plantings with nothing using them is actually depressing to me. And that's what I thought I would see on the highline. I mean, this is not a whole lot of nature, and I didn't think anything would be able to find it in the middle of Manhattan, but I was completely wrong. So this proved to me that thoughtful native plantings can bring life back to the middle of Manhattan, which means I think we can do it almost anywhere. But there are 4 things we need to think about if we're going to be successful. And one of them is we've got to shrink the area we have in lawn. We have more than 40 million acres in lawn. That's a 2005 statistic. So who knows how big it is today. That's an area the size of New England that is dedicated to an ecological dead space. Yes, it's a status symbol. Yes, we can show our neighbors that we are high status, good citizens. But if we cut the area in half, the area of lawn in half, we can still, the area of lawn that we keep, we'll still manicure, we can still be good citizens, but we will have well-planted yards. And if we cut the area of lawn in half, that'll give us 20 million acres that we could put towards conservation, and we'll do it right at home. So we can call this Homegrown National Park. How big is Homegrown National Park? It's bigger than the Adirondacks, plus Yellowstone, plus Yosemite, plus Grand Tetons, Canyonlands, Mount Rainier, North Cascades, plus the Badlands National Park, Olympic National Park, Sequoia National Park, plus the Grand Canyon, plus Denali, which is huge, plus the Great Smoky Mountains. Add up all those parks, still less than 20 million acres. So Homegrown National Park is going to be the biggest park in the country. What do we get when we put part of nature at home? We get the opportunity to develop a personal relationship with the natural world. We could do it at our own time or our own pace. All you have to do is go outside. You can avoid crowds. You know, if you go to a real national park, millions of people there, you got to deal with them. It's also free. There's no admission fee. It's never closed, no matter what pandemic comes down the road. No travel hassles. You get to experience the natural world alone. And I think that's absolutely essential if you're going to develop a personal relationship with the natural world, not mediated by somebody else. And I think this is particularly important for our kids who are suffering from nature deficit disorder. So we could get 30 kids, we put them on a bus with a teacher, and they drive for an hour, go to a natural area, and they walk around for an hour. The teacher tells them not to touch anything. And they get back on the bus and they go home. And I'm sure that's better than nothing. But it's really been an experience with 30 other kids and a teacher telling them not to touch anything. If they have some part of nature right where they live, they can go outside and establish that personal relationship all on their own. No parental supervision. Let them go outside all by themselves. They will be okay. I guarantee it. And it's so important that they establish that relationship, because they're going to be the future stewards of our planet. And if they don't have a relationship with what they're supposed to be stewarding, if they don't love it, if they don't recognize that this literally is a life or death situation, because we're not going to sustain ourselves, we're not going to be on this planet without the natural world. That's why it's so important that they be able to go out and visit some part of nature. And maybe they're going to learn how to hunt lizards. I'm learning this from my own granddaughter, Zoe, who lives in Hawaii on a very modest patch of nature. It's a little piece of lawn with a hedge, but there are anole lizards there. And when she discovered that, she sent me this picture to explain, this is how you hunt lizards. You get on the ground and you cover yourself with leaves and sticks so that the lizard doesn't see you coming. And then you crawl very slowly toward the lizard. No smiling. This is serious business. You can wear your best dress, but you sneak up on the lizard, you catch the lizard, you put it in an aquarium, then you take care of it. You learn how to be a good steward of the natural world. You develop that personal relationship with that lizard. Now, I don't think Zoe's going to be crawling on the ground in her best dress, catching lizards the rest of her life. I don't think. She sent me this picture the other day, so who knows? But I guarantee she's going to remember catching lizards in Hawaii the rest of her life. But I also guarantee she's going to be a good steward of the planet because of that. If you want your kids to do more than catch lizards, get Nancy Stranisti's Nature Play at Home. Dozens of examples of how to expose your kids to the natural world right where they live. And if you want to join Homegrown National Park, you can do it. Go to homegrownnationalpark.org. That is our new website, and get yourself on the map. What you do is you follow the directions for putting in your location the amount of area you're going to convert from lawn to native plantings, or the amount of area you already have converted, the amount of area you're protecting, and then you'll be on the map, and you get to see who else in your area is on the map. This is our attempt at social media to try to reach beyond the choir. I've been talking to the choir for 15 years, and the choir is very attentive, but there's a lot of non-choir folks out there who might get interested in a competitive, get on the map type of experience. We've got over 8,000 people on the map right now. And by the way, it doesn't cost anything. You're not joining another organization and giving up the National Wildlife Federation or Audubon or anything else. You're just joining this effort to convert the country to a more natural place. And you can still belong to your societies. So get yourself on the map. We're going to shrink the lawn. What plants are we going to put in the area that is now lawn? Some of them, I am going to argue, are what I call keystone plants. Remember the Roman arch? There's the Roman arch. What is the keystone? It's the stone in the middle of the arch. And if you take the keystone out of the arch falls down. Well, if you take keystone plants out of their local food web, the food web collapses because the keystone plants are making most of the food. We have found out that just 5% of our native plants are making 75% of the caterpillar food that drives the food webs. 14% of our native plants are making 90% of the caterpillar food that drives our food webs. So the question no longer is simply, are natives better than non-natives? That's too simplistic. On average, they are, but there are some natives doing most of the work and a lot of natives not doing all that much. So the question really is, would we rather have the native species that are going to support most of the pollinators and most of the caterpillars, or would we rather have less productive plants, or even worse, those Asian plants that are supporting very little and at best, and at worst, escaping into our natural areas and ecologically castrating them. Remember, when an invasive species moves to a natural area, it's displacing the native plants that do support the pollinators and the caterpillars. That's the problem with invasive plants. I get an email once in a while from somebody saying, don't you know that ginkgos, ginkgo biloba from Asia, actually grew in North America 7 million years ago? That makes them native. That means I can plant them and everything will be great. Yes, I do know that ginkgos grew in North America 7 million years ago. We can argue about whether that makes them native today, but I'm not going to have that argument because that's not the metric anymore. It's not whether they're native or not. It's whether they're doing anything or not. I don't care if ginkgos grew in the moon 7 million years ago. They produce 0 species of caterpillars. They are there, but they are not contributing to your local food web. What is contributing more than anything else in 84% of the counties of North America, it's oaks. Genus Quercus. In the mid-Atlantic states, they support 557 species of caterpillars, 557 species of bird food, 950 species nationwide. There's no other plant genus that comes close to that. This is the power of keystone oaks in my yard. Now remember, I've taken pictures of 1,090 species of moths so far. Haven't gotten to the butterflies yet. I will. Out of the 1,090 species, 955 have known host plants. So there's more than 100 we don't know what they're eating. Out of the 955 species, 283 species use oaks. Now we have 69 genera of native woody plants on our property, and only one of them is the genus Quercus, the oaks. And we have hundreds of genera of herbaceous plants. So that means that oaks represent less than 1.5% of our woody plant diversity and way less than 1% of our total plant diversity. But they're supporting almost 30% of our moss species diversity. Imagine what would happen if we took oaks out of our yard. What would happen to the biodiversity? It would be considerably less. That's the power of a keystone plant. How do you find out what the keystone plants are where you live? You go to National Wildlife Federation website, put in your zip code, and the ranked list of both the woody and herbaceous most powerful native plants in your county will pop up. So this is a typical list, and I stopped just because I ran out of room of what you will find on this website. Oaks are going to lead the way again in most counties in the country, typically followed by native cherries and native willows. Blueberries are very high, and so on. Now notice I say native, native, native. If I go to the nursery and say I want to buy a cherry, I guarantee you they're going to sell me an ornamental cherry from Asia. If I say I want to buy a willow, they'll sell me a weeping willow from Turkey. If I want to buy a birch, it'll be a European birch, or a maple, probably be a Japanese maple. You got to specify that you want a native member of these important genera. Because if you get a non-native member, it's going to reduce, on average, caterpillar use by 65%. We've done that experiment. These are the top herbaceous genera. The goldenrods are always way up there. The various genera that asters were broken up into, helianthus, sunflowers. Not only are those three the top in terms of supporting caterpillars, goldenrods support more than 110 species of caterpillars, but they also support the most specialist bees. You know, we've got 4,000 species of native bees in this country, and more than a third of them can only reproduce on the pollen of particular plants. So if you have those three genera in your yard, you can support more than 40 species of native bees. And if you don't have those three genera in your yard, that's 40 species that will not be there. If you're from Canada, there's a similar website up there that will guide you through native plantings. Okay, we're going to shrink the lawn. We're going to put in Keystone Plants. We're going to invite a lot of insects to our yard, and then we're going to kill them with our security light, which of course is not the goal. There is a lot of research that tells us that light pollution at night is one of the major causes of insect declines. These are all the ways that lights are killing our insects. And to me, this is actually good news. We have to turn around insect declines. We've already lost 45% of the insects on the planet, 45% of the things that keep us alive. So can't tolerate that. We got to turn around. If we can do that by simply flicking a switch, turning out the lights at night, we're getting off easy. Nothing could be easier. But I know what you're going to say. Oh, I can't turn the light out over my garage because the bad man will come. All right, put a motion sensor on that light so that it only turns on when the bad man does come. And the first thing you're going to realize is the bad man does not come very often. And if you don't want to do that, take the white bulb out of your security light and put in a yellow bulb. A yellow LED bulb is the best. Yellow wavelengths are far less attractive to nocturnal insects. So if we switched out our white bulbs for yellow bulbs overnight, we would save billions of insects nationwide, and probably billions of dollars too, because LED lights are much more energy efficient. Okay, we're going to shrink the lawn. We're going to put in Keystone Plants. We're going to turn out our lights. Then we're going to invite Mosquito Joe to come kill all of our insects. There's no shortage to the ways we can kill our insects. This is a booming business around the country. Mosquito Joe is single-handedly undoing everything that I have talked about for the last 15 years. And he says, well, it's okay because this is a natural product. And it is a natural product. It's pyrethroids. It's made from chrysanthemums, but you know, cyanide is a natural product too. So I'm not sure that's a good argument. He'll also say this only kills mosquitoes, and that's not even close to correct. I don't know if you saw the headlines last year during fall migration when the monarchs were flying south. They flew through Mosquito Joe a couple times, hundreds of dead monarchs on the ground. This kills all the insects it comes in contact with. The big thing is it doesn't work. In order to control mosquitoes in the adult stage, you have to kill 90% of the adult mosquitoes. Mosquito Joe kills between 10 and 50% is the highest it's ever been measured, which means he's not even close to actually controlling the mosquito population. So it's expensive and it doesn't work. If you really want to control mosquitoes, you do it this way. Get a bucket, fill it full of water, and people say, how big a bucket? It doesn't matter. The bigger, the better. Put a handful of straw or hay in there and let it ferment for a couple of days. You're building up the population of algae and diatoms in your bucket, which becomes irresistible to mosquitoes that want to lay their eggs. They lay their eggs in your bucket, your special sauce there. Then you put in a mosquito dunk, which is Bacillus thuringiensis. This formulation of it only kills aquatic diptera. You put it in your bucket there and the mosquito larvae that hatch out will chew on it and they die. And it is targeted. It only kills them. If you get a dragonfly in here, it won't hurt it. If your dog licks it or a bird drinks it, it won't hurt it at all. Don't go throwing these around in natural areas because it kills all the aquatic diptera, including chironomids and a lot of things that do not bite and are very, very helpful. But it works well in your bucket. I do sympathize with people who live next to a salt marsh because you've got an awful lot of mosquito breeding area there. Mosquito Joe is not going to help you a bit. But you might as well give dunks a chance because maybe you can attract all those mosquitoes to lay an egg in your bucket. The fourth thing we need to do is to landscape in a way that allows caterpillars to complete their development. What do I mean by that? Well, I live in Chester County, Pennsylvania, where oaks support 511 species of caterpillars. A few of them, like the polyphemus moth, complete their development on the tree. The caterpillar eats the leaves, then they spin a cocoon and hang from a branch, then they emerge as an adult, then they do it all again. Everything happens on the tree. And I wish that was true for most caterpillars on most trees, but it's not. More than 90% will grow on the tree, but when they're finished growing, they drop from the tree and wiggle their way beneath the ground to pupate underground when the soil's loose enough to do that, or they spin a cocoon in the leaf litter that's under the tree. And that's the problem. We have no leaf litter under the tree, and we mow and compact our soil to the point where it's so hard the caterpillars can't get underground. So this becomes an ecological trap. The way we landscape everywhere becomes an ecological trap. We call those moths in, they lay eggs, larvae grow, then they drop down and they die. I am convinced that this is another major cause of insect declines around the country. And of course, the cement landscape is even less of a viable option for our poor caterpillars. This is what most people do. You have a tree in a yard. Nobody's measured how well caterpillars survive in a situation like this. We're actually doing that this summer, but I guarantee they're going to do better in a situation like this, where you have a layered landscape. Here's your tree, maybe a dogwood, a native azalea, ferns, spring ephemerals. It's a safe site. The caterpillar drops down. The soil is not compacted. They can easily get beneath the soil to pupate, or they can spin a cocoon in the leaf litter that's under there. Safe sites. This is where you can make your spring ephemeral gardens. You put beds around your tree. That's how you shrink the lawn. Big beds around all of your trees. The caterpillars drop down to safe sites. This is where you can use your ground covers, your wild ginger, your mayapple, your foam flower, your ferns. This is a hotel in Athens, Georgia. These are red maples. Any caterpillar developing on here can drop down into a safe site, complete its development, even though this is the middle of a city. So we can do a whole lot better with how we landscape under our plants if we're thinking about the complete life cycle of those precious caterpillars. Another one of my grad students, Desiree Narango, did some wonderful work with chickadees in the suburbs of Washington, D.C. And her results suggest there's actually room for compromise in our plant choices. And that's good news to me. What she did was look at the sustainability of chickadee populations in landscapes that were primarily native plants versus landscapes that were dominated by introduced ornamentals. And the first thing she found is when the landscapes are dominated by introduced plants, they produce 75% fewer caterpillars. So the amount of bird food is reduced by 75%. Those landscapes are 60% less likely to have breeding chickadees at all. Birds came, their nest box is up there, but they looked around and said, there's not enough to eat here. We're not even going to try. If they did try, those nests contained 1 point fewer eggs. They were 29% less likely to survive at all. If they did survive, they produced 1.2 fewer fledglings, and it took them 1.5 days longer to reach fledging. Now, if you put all that information into a population growth model as a function of the percentage of non-native plant, woody plant biomass in your yard, from none to 100%, we focus on woody plant biomass because that's where chickadees are foraging. This is what you get. This is the dotted line. This dotted line represents replacement rate. This is the rate at which the population has to make babies in order to replace the adults that die every year. If you reproduce at this rate, that's a sustainable population. It's not growing, but it's not shrinking either. If you make more babies than adults die every year, you've got a growing population. But if you make fewer, anything down here, you have a shrinking, unsustainable population. So as the percentage of non-native plants grows in your yard, you move into the unsustainable portion very quickly. This is where those lines overlap, very generously speaking. So you can have up to 30% of your woody plant biomass non-native without wrecking your food web. None of these should be invasive plants. No burning bush, no barberry, no calorie pear. But you can have your forsythia, you can have your ginkgo, you can have your crepe myrtle. They're not going to move, and you won't destroy your local food web unless they exceed 30%. So this is the area of compromise. And I'm excited about that, because if my message was you can't have any non-native plants, nobody would listen. Everybody loves their non-native plants, or most people. Remember, it's not the presence of non-native plants that destroys food webs. It's the absence of the native plants that support them. Increase the number of these and we can tolerate these. Can we use native plants in formal designs? Of course we can. This is a Linus Shaughnessy design. I got this in an email the other day. This picture was taken from a drone at 400 feet. That's a big garden, and you don't get more formal than that, but every plant in that garden is a native plant. Formality is a function of the design. It's not a function of the plants in the design. Our native plants are used in formal designs in Europe all the time. And I guess that's okay because they're non-native plants over there. Can we get a pollinator garden into a typical suburban yard like this without offending anybody? Of course we can. Put a little fence around it. It shows it's intentional. It's well maintained. It's pretty. It delivers pollen to a number of different species of bees. It's not very big, but if everybody does it, it certainly will help. Remember why we need pollinators. You hear all the time we need them because they pollinate 1/3 of our crops. It's about 1/12 of our crops. That's the reality. But forget the crop argument. A lot of people say, well, I don't live next to a farm, so I don't need any pollinators. Our pollinators pollinate 80% of all plants and 90% of all flowering plants. If we lost our pollinators, we'd lose 80 to 90% of the plants on the planet. Not an option. It has nothing to do with agriculture. Where do we need pollinators? Every place we need plants, which is every place. How about this design? That's a Drew Latham design. Imagine the amount of life supported here versus the amount of life supported here. Seems like a no-brainer to me. Can municipalities help us live with nature? Yes, they can, and more of them are doing it. This is a program in Minnesota. It's several years old now. It's called the Lawn to Legume program. It's a cost-sharing program where the state is paying homeowners to take out some or all of their lawn and replace it with appropriate Minnesota prairie plants. Very successful. Pennsylvania has a young program. It's only 2 years old. Lawn conversion program. You get up to $5,000 per acre to convert your lawn to native plantings. It was designed to help watershed management. But this shows you can kill 2 birds with 1 stone. You do help watershed management, but you also help biodiversity a tremendous amount. Florida, there's an island off Florida where they're paying residents to allow burrowing owls to burrow in the front yard. This is the way the Endangered Species Act should have been written, with carrots rather than sticks. If you have an endangered species on your yard, you get paid to take care of it rather than fined. Everybody would want an endangered species on their property. Missouri, Fayetteville, Arkansas had a bounty on calorie repairs. You take out a calorie repair, you get a free tree replacement. And even water utilities are getting into the act. In San Antonio, you get a $100 coupon to put in water efficient native plants and get rid of the water inefficient non-natives. And of course, the very successful lawn conversion programs, particularly in California. You know, California, disaster, no water at all there for thirsty lawns. So you get up to $2 per square foot rebate by putting in xeric planting and taking out that lawn. I think we made 3 missteps in the early years of conservation. The first one's a serious one. We've come to think of nature as optional. It's nice, we like it, but we don't need it. Big mistake, big mistake. Of course, if we think it's not essential, that means when push comes to shove, when resources are in short supply, which is always, nature will always take a back seat. I went to the Cincinnati Zoo before the virus broke out, and there was this wall-sized poster there, which to me epitomizes our society's view of conservation. We want to save nature so that future generations can enjoy it. That was Teddy Roosevelt's argument for the national park system. We want to save these places so the future generations can enjoy their splendor. But to me, that suggests nature is there just for entertainment. No wonder we don't think it's essential. Entertainment is not essential, but nature is essential. We need it so that we have future generations. It's a little bit more urgent. We've also assumed that humans and nature cannot coexist. Now, we talked about this. But by restricting conservation just to places where there aren't a lot of humans, we're destined to failure because those places are not big enough and not connected enough in order to conserve the species that run the ecosystems that we all depend on. David Quammen has this excellent analogy between a Persian rug and an ecosystem. This is a functional Persian rug. That is not 71 Persian rugs. That's 71 rug fragments, none of which are acting like a Persian rug. And that is what we have done to our ecosystems. The UN designates biosphere reserves as places of ecological significance. And I hate that language because it suggests they're places on planet Earth without any ecological significance. Not so. Every square inch of the planet has ecological significance, including our yards, including our corporate landscapes, including our roadsides, including all the places we've destroyed. So we need to glue our rug back together again, not just to create biological corridors that allow plants and animals to move back and forth between viable habitats, but to create viable habitats where we've already destroyed them, where we live, where we work, where we play, even to some extent where we farm. We, for the first time, are going to coexist with nature, first time in modern history anyway. Our third misstep was to leave Earth stewardship to just a few specialists, a few conservation biologists, a few ecologists. We didn't see it as an inherent responsibility of everybody on the planet. But I don't know why, because every person on the planet depends entirely on the quality of Earth's ecosystem. So why wouldn't everybody have the responsibility of good Earth stewardship? Stan Rushworth, the Cherokee elder, once said the Western settler mindset was, I have rights. The mindset of indigenous people is, I have obligations. You're not born with these mindsets, you're taught them. And we are good at teaching this one. We have been terrible at teaching our kids and our peers, terrible for generations, that we all have obligations to stewarding planet Earth, the only planet that we have. It doesn't mean that you have to save biodiversity for a living, but you can save it where you live. And if you do that, it empowers you. You know, so many of us today feel powerless. Well, the Earth's problems are so huge. What can one person do? Well, one person can shrink their lawn. One person can get rid of their invasive plants. One person can put in a pollinator garden. One person can use keystone plants. One person can totally revitalize the ecosystem where they live. One person can turn out their lights. There's a lot of things one person can do. And it also shrinks the problem down to something that's manageable for each one of us. Don't think about the entire planet's problems. You'll get depressed if you do that. Just worry about your little piece of the Earth. If you own property, that's obvious. That's where you start. If you don't own property, help somebody who does. Help a land conservancy. Help a park, help a preserve. They're all underfunded. They're all understaffed. They will love you as a volunteer. So as property owners or as volunteers, each one of us has the power, and we certainly have the responsibility to fix dead landscapes like this. Whether or not we decide to do so is going to determine nature's fate, and then ultimately our own fate. Now, I think I've convinced my grandkids that you are nature's best hope. I hope I've convinced you as well. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Doug. I know I see we do have a few questions in the chat, so I'm just going to start from the beginning. And I also had one that was emailed, so I'll share that one first. This question was, how do you best spot caterpillars in your garden? If you have a lot of native plants, you notice the moths, but how do you find the caterpillars?
You have to develop a search image for them. You've got to realize that they're hiding from you. They're hiding from the birds. One easy way is to look for caterpillars at night, because the birds are not hunting them at night, so they come out. During the day, a lot of them are on the bark of trees, or they're underneath the leaves. They look like leaf damage. They're very good at disguising themselves, but they're much more apparent at night. So go out with a flashlight and look up in the trees, and you'll see a lot more caterpillars. Don't look for caterpillars right now in the springtime. The birds have gotten them all. This is when they're feeding them their young hundreds a day. So the end of July, early August is a great time to look for caterpillars. But your eye has to, you see them, but you don't think it's a caterpillar. That's the biggest problem. So
excellent. Great advice. And then a question from Gregory. They had a large pile of fallen sticks and branches that supported, among other things, a large group of fireflies, but town code enforcement said the pile had to go. Do you have any alternate solutions?
Well, you can have fireflies simply by having good amounts of leaf litter on your property. As larvae, fireflies are predators. They're predators in leaf litter, where they eat other arthropods and worms. So simply not removing all the leaves from your property, having good leaf litter in your flower beds, and that maintains the moisture. Fireflies need high humidity in order to survive. That should be enough to give you a good population of fireflies. I don't know why your township makes you get rid of your stick piles. That's something that ought to be changed. Now, these are rules that were established years ago based on faulty information. So we're people, we can change these rules, but we have to do it. You know, join your homeowners association, join your civic association, talk to your town council and say, let's look at the real ecological facts here before we start cleaning up everything.
Right. A question from Janet. Since we are not going to see the cicada emergence on Long Island, does that mean that the cicada killer bee will not be seen as well?
No, it doesn't. The cicada killer bee is really a wasp. They're very different things. Bees are herbivores, wasps are predators. And it is a specialist on the annual cicada. The annual cicada comes out in July and is here through August. And that is what the cicada killer specializes on. The periodical cicadas are out right now. They're out at my house. And when they come out once every 17 years, there's no specialist predator that can wait 17 years to have its next meal. So a lot of everything eats them, but only once. And they get around all those predators by making more cicadas than, the predators get full. I've got pictures of squirrels eating in my front yard, but he eats 3 or 4 and then he's full. He goes away and the rest of them survive. So yeah, don't worry about the cicada killer, which is a terrible name. It does kill cicadas, but it's totally harmless. I've never heard of anybody being stung by a cicada killer. I know that you get chased by them, but that's the male. He's chasing you away from the female so that you don't mate with his female. It's that simple.
And a question from Christine. Are sawfly larvae good bird food?
Yes. So we kind of group them in and we call them caterpillars, but they're really types of Hymenoptera. They're types of wasps. They don't sting. They are herbivores and they are very closely related to the moths and the butterflies. And functionally, I've watched a bluebird family. The parents raised them entirely on sawflies. They got off my white pines on a year when it was cool and wet and rainy and the other caterpillars were very, very low in density. So yeah, they like them just fine.
Oh, wow. And does the bumblebee queen find a new nest site in the spring?
From the old one, I believe she does. Yeah, I don't think they use the same nest twice. Good question though. They like old mouse nests. They like holes in rock walls, protected places. Somebody sent me a picture of a bumblebee nest in a birdhouse just the other day. We're trying to increase nesting opportunities for bumblebees because like the other native bees, they're in decline. So,
right. And a question from Alice. Is it easier to find nativars? What do you know about the relative value of nativars as opposed to true natives?
It truly is easier if you go to a nursery. A nativar is just a cultivar of a native plant and you look for native plants. More and more nurseries are carrying them, but they're almost always cultivars of native plants. Remember, the horticulture trade has believed accurately that you were only going to buy pretty plants for the last 100 years. So there's been a tremendous amount of pressure to find the prettiest plants, both natives and non-natives, and patent them, genetically protect them so that the prettiest traits are always propagated. That's what a cultivar is. It's a genetic variant of a particular native species. So the question is, are those variants as good ecologically as the straight species? And the answer is, it depends. It depends on what the genetic trait was. So we did a study that looked at a number of cultivar traits, and the only one that decreased insect use was to make a green leaf red or purple, because that loads the leaf with anthocyanins, which are feeding deterrents, and so the insects that want to eat those leaves no longer recognize it. So you can avoid red leaf cultivars and come out ahead right away. In terms of flowers, a lot of our cultivar traits focus on flowers. Annie White at the University of Vermont has looked at that, and the news is not quite as good there. It's very easy to mess up the specialized relationship between native bees and flowers by changing flower traits. Not always. There are some cultivars where there's actually better pollen and nectar available, but typically it's decreased in some way. I would love to see nurseries sell the cultivars, but also the straight species right next to them, so that you get to choose when you're looking for function. Cultivars are also propagated clonally, so there's zero genetic variability out there. And in the age of climate change, we know that that's what's going to save our plants, is genetic variability that allows them to adapt to these drastic changes we're creating. And if our plants have no genetic variability, they're not going to be able to do it. So that's another reason to try to get straight species.
Right. And a question from Doug, are there any caterpillars that are not eaten by birds? For example, our tent caterpillars.
Yeah, birds don't like hairy caterpillars. I don't know why all caterpillars aren't hairy, because it's a really good protection against bird predation. There are birds that specialize on hairy caterpillars, though, the yellow-bill and black-billed cuckoo in particular, and they love tent caterpillars. They slice open that tent and they eat every one. They love gypsy moth. They love fall webworm. But it's only 2 species and they're never very common. So the hairy caterpillars definitely have an advantage with the birds, because the birds don't like them. The hairs get dislodged in their throat and their stomach. The reason that cuckoos can eat hairy caterpillars is because they have the ability to throw up their stomach lining and get rid of those hairs periodically, and other birds can't do that.
And a question from Carol, do you have any ideas about a healthier weed control for lawns?
Healthier than herbicide?
Right.
Well, yeah, I have an idea. You're not going to like it, but if the lawn we keep is not going to just be let go. So mow it frequently, and that is the best control for broadleaf weeds. Grass does well when it's mowed. Its meristems are down deep, so mowing it does not kill the meristem, but mowing a broadleaf does kill the meristem. So mowing frequently increases the competitive value of your lawn, your grasses, and they will take over. And so you can do that without any herbicide at all. Will you have a few dandelions and a few clovers? Probably, but that's okay.
Right.
That used to be what everybody had in the 50s, and it was okay. So.
And an interesting question, any suggestions on a deer-resistant pollinator and keystone plants?
There aren't any deer-resistant keystone plants. Remember, a keystone plant is the one that's making the most food, which means the most things like to eat it, including deer. Deer and caterpillars have very similar taste buds. So deer love our oaks too, and they eat every one of them. Things that deer don't like spice bush. That's why one of the reasons we have so much spice bush. Spice bush supports spice bush, swallowtail, and a few other things, but not very many, because they just don't taste good. So when you find a plant that deer don't eat, typically there's very few caterpillars on it as well. The real solution to our native plant issue, the deer problem is one of the major causes of invasiveness in our plants. It tips the competitive nature of our native plants. It tips it towards the non-natives. When you have burning bush and autumn olive and everything else in your natural area, the deer don't touch those, but they eat all the native plants, most of them anyway. So of course those other guys take over. If we had far fewer deer, way below the carrying capacity, we would not have an invasive plant problem the way we do today. So controlling deer would help Lyme disease, it would help our forests regenerate, and it would help the invasive species problem. A lot of ecological pluses to controlling deer. Somebody just wrote an article, I gotta write that down, that says that deer are a much bigger threat to our forests today than climate change. And I think he's right. So very serious problem.
Right. And I think this might be one of our last questions. It was, are there any herbs native to our area or in the Northeast or Long Island that will support insects?
Herbs?
Herbs. No, I couldn't think of anything.
Well,
other than
members of the carrot family. So your parsley and your dill, is that an herb? They are not native, but the carrot family is, and the black swallowtail is a carrot family specialist. Of course, those herbs have been bred to the point where we like them. So a lot of the nasties have been bred out of them, and the black swallowtail enjoys that. To say, okay, here's the right family of plants, but they don't have any nasties, and they love them. So that would be one that supports at least the black swallowtail. Herbs, for the most part, they're tasty for us. They're not going to be major. I don't know. Is dandelion an herb? A lot of things eat dandelion. It's kind of a pan-global species at this point, but a lot of generalist caterpillars will eat dandelions. I'd have to look into that, but
interesting. Yeah. And I'm sorry, in cities, what would be a way that someone could have support ecosystem services when you have less control over your private property?
That's a good question. First of all, you can be that very important volunteer that helps. All the cities have parks and preserves, and they do like volunteers. If you live in an apartment complex that has any type of a yard at all, now you're not in control of the maintenance of that yard, but a lot of apartments have yards, and they've got trees in the yards. And if you suggest, maybe you can change the way you landscape, the superintendent will say, I don't have the resources, I don't have the crew to do what you're suggesting. So one of the things I would love to see people do is adopt a tree on the property, even though it's not yours. Say, I'm going to take care of the area under this tree, create a bed, make it caterpillar friendly so the caterpillars that fall down have a place. It's going to take a little bit of labor. You're going to have to plant it. You're going to have to weed it, do all the things that the superintendent doesn't want to spend time doing. It'll keep the mowers away from the tree, but that can be your tree. And that's an important way. You're one person in that apartment complex. If everybody adopted a tree, they'd all be taken care of. And it would be one way you could help out.
Awesome. And can goats be used to control non-native flora?
Goats can be used to eat it, and they are used to eat it. The thing is, goats don't care whether it's native or not. They eat everything, and they don't kill the root system. So unless you own the goats and they're there all the time, which means there will never be any plants there because they're always eating it, it will knock it down. And if you just want to clear an area without big machines and stuff, goats can do that. But the root systems are still there, and you're going to have to deal with it when you take the goats away and they come back. But maybe it's easier to do at that point. So goats, I would say, are a temporary solution, but not a permanent solution. They're also pretty expensive if you rent goats. So
more expensive than goat yoga, right?
I guess, yeah.
But and you did touch on this question a little bit earlier, Doug, but as a question from Madison, as global warming continues, do you expect the native species we see today to be vastly different than species we'll see in the future?
It depends on how much in the future you're talking about. There's a lot of people talking about assisted migration. We should start planting plants from the south up here because they'll be able to do better when the planet's warmer. At least right now, I don't support that because the planet is not getting evenly warmer. It's getting more erratic. That's why we're saying climate change instead of global warming. We still have our polar vortex every winter. You still get those cold snaps that will kill any of those southern plants you bring up now. What's happening is greater variability, heavier rainstorms, stronger droughts, bigger winds. Everything is more extreme. Will that change the type of plants? In the West, it's really doing that. I mean, the mega droughts that they're having out there is it's killing trees and it will replace them with grassland eventually. That combined with the forest fires that we are causing. I mean, you say climate change is causing fireflies. You look at what causes what actually starts each one of those fireflies. It's always human caused. Every once in a while there's a lightning strike, but it's human caused, either with an electric spark or somebody throwing a cigarette out. It's the way, and that has burned up half the West. So that's changing our plant communities for sure.
Thank you. Well,
I don't know.
thank you.
I'm really starting to ramble. I'm sorry.
No, not at all. That was excellent. I just wanted to personally say thank you. It was very enlightening, and I know we got a lot of questions, but also thank yous in the chat. So thank you to everyone who
You're
joined
welcome.
us.
Thanks for listening, everybody.
Yes, thank you. And I will send out the recording tomorrow to everyone who had registered, and I'll also send it to you, Doug. And thank you all to our sponsors tonight was the Leo S. Walsh Foundation, Quag Wildlife Refuge, and the Peconic Land Trust. So I know it was very inspiring for me, and I hope you all were as well, and hope to see you soon. Thank you.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Bye.
Bye-bye.